Okay, so this lecture is the first of a series of lectures that basically is all about a case study, or at least a long discussion of an example of intense collaboration. I call it Bridging Worlds, Diverse Perspectives, and the Challenges of Natural Resource Management. It's going to be an example of a place called Uluru Katajuta National Park in Australia that is actually co-managed by an indigenous group of Aboriginal people called the Adanungu people, along with the Australian national government. There's a few examples around the world where national governments work with indigenous people, but this is probably one of the biggest and most famous of the national parks, and an example of really the good and bads of trying to make that work. And so this lecture is basically designed to introduce you to the place. Let me jump into here. We'll have a couple more lectures that then talk about the people. And then finally, the last lecture will bring it all together, the process and actually making it happen. The history of this, both geologically and socially, is amazing and really sets up the context for the challenges that go into a thing we call co-management in this case. But I think it's a good story, and a story a few people have told. And in fact, I'll be reading from the book, one of my favorite books, called In a Sunburned Country by Bill Bryson. And I'll be reading some sections from that in the next few lectures, and I'll also be going to their plan. And also, I'll be reading from the indigenous people's stories too in this. So hopefully this will be somewhat entertaining as well as enlightening for you. It is a good story. Okay. So we chose this as a case study. It does a lot of different things. I think a lot of the things we talk about in this course are very much highlighted. I will explicitly try to point those out as we get through them, but I think you can look and see for yourself. Some of those things we talk about is just basic social, psychological concepts like values and attitudes. It's sprinkled throughout here, especially when we're talking about the culture that people bring to decision making in the national park. The collaboration and how the decisions are made among the local people who live there and the federal government, and all the bad decisions that were made when there wasn't collaboration. And then finally, where they are now in terms of really an intensive partnership, what we're calling co-management. So this is a picture of Uluru, formerly known as Ayers Rock. So as I was growing up, it was called Ayers Rock, and that's how I heard it mentioned when it was talked in the United States. But in the 80s, it got a new name, actually in the 80s and 90s. And so it's a fairly famous area. I think a lot of people, when they think of Australia, they think of the coral reefs and they think of the big, beautiful cities like Sydney. However, I'm kind of a desert guy, but I think a lot of just the natural people who think about kind of nature-based attractions, this is probably one of the highlights for people to go to, is Uluru. And just to highlight this, I'll read from the book. From Bill Bryson. Bill Bryson, again, one of my favorite authors, wrote a book called Walk in the Woods. That's just probably the most famous book written about hiking the Appalachian Trail. In this case, he was writing about all of Alaska, but towards the end of the book, he finally makes it to Ayers Rock. That's what it was called then when he wrote it. Again, for modern times, it's called Uluru, but I'll just read from him, and when he says Ayers Rock, where he's talking about that thing you're looking at. The thing about Ayers Rock is that by the time you finally get there, you are already a little sick of it. Even when you are 1,000 miles from it, you can't go a day in Australia without seeing it 4 or 5 or 6 times. On postcards, on travel agents' posters, on the cover of souvenir picture books, and as you get near the rock, the frequency of exposure increases. So you are aware, as you drive to the park entrance and pay the ambitiously pitched admission fee of $15 a head, $15, this was like the 80s, and follow the approach road around, that you have driven 1,300 miles to look at a large, inert, loaf-shaped object that you have seen photographically portrayed 1,000 times already. In consequence, your mood as you approach this famous monolith is restrained, unexpected, unexpectant, and pessimistic even. And then you see it, and you are instantly transfixed. There, in the middle of a memorable and imposing emptiness, stands an eminence of exceptional nobility and grandeur, 1,150 feet high, a mile and a half long, 5.5 miles around, less red than photographs have led you to expect, but in every other way more arresting than you could ever have supposed. And I would totally agree with this. I drove 2 days to get to this rock, and I remember the last approach road you're going into it, you're thinking, this thing better be good. And as you turn the corner and actually see it, it does. It is something that almost takes your breath away. The only other thing that's ever taken my breath away to that extent was the Grand Canyon. So it is. It's weird. You wouldn't think a big rock would do it, but this one does. And again, you're thinking, I've never heard of it. You just need to dig a little bit. It is a big tourism attraction in Australia. We call it Uluru now, even though Bill Bryson called it Ayers Rock. There it is. Again, it is an extremely massive monolith. In fact, some people call it the world's largest rock. So it was one imposing stone, not composed of many stones put together, but one big rock. Some people call it the Earth's belly button. We're an outie, apparently, the Earth. There's just one of the many pictures that Bill Bryson referred to. It's often taken in sunset, sunrise pictures with the stars behind it. It's gone there. Many have gone there. The folks on the left, hopefully you recognize them. That's our king now, King Charles, and then Princess Diana. They went there, and then their kid, William, basically reenacted that with Kate in the 2000s, and they went there. So, it's something that famous people go to, and it's a very common thing, and I would say look it up if you've never heard of it, because I'll show you a few pictures here, but it is pretty cool. Now, the official name of the park is Uluru Kata-Tjuta. There is this section of geologic wonders not too far away from Uluru, from that rock, called Kata-Tjuta. Again, pretty cool. There's some nice little hiking and fun trails to go around there, also to explore. And like I said, I have also been there. You might see some pictures I've taken here at some point. But I went there on my sabbatical when I got a chance to do that. But still, what's the point? I'm talking about this big rock in the middle of Australia. Uluru Kata-Tjuta National Park, the thing why we care about it, at least for this class, it's an example of a unique, difficult collaboration effort. So an example of the federal government working with an indigenous group to manage a famous national park. And then also, why I like it, the sustainable natural resource management. We talk about sustainability a lot. We talk about the ecological characteristics a lot, and sometimes the economics. But this one really highlights the social aspect of sustainability. So collaboration, sense of place, international agreements, ways of managing sustainability is all discussed in the discussion of this protected area. Let's talk about the place. So it got its name in 1873. Of course, this is how a lot of colonial areas went. The English claimed they discovered it, even though the native people had known of it for tens of thousands of years. And they had called it Uluru, that was the original name, but changed to Ayers Rock, and it lasted with the name Ayers Rock up until the 80s or 90s. It's one of Australia's most famous natural landmarks. I would say probably next to the Barrier Reef. It's probably the next big famous landmark. It's a major national park and tourism destination in Australia. Like I said, one of the largest monoliths in the world, maybe the largest single rock that's exposed in the world. It's geologic terms, 600 million years old, and it's really tall, 348 meters high. So it's a big old rock there. So where is Uluru Kata-Tjuta? Well, let's start with the basics. There's Australia down there, the world's smallest continent, but still pretty big island, if you want to think of it that way, underneath Southeast Asia. And there are the political boundaries within Australia. Uluru Kata-Tjuta is located in the Northern Territory, so right there in the middle of the continent. And there's a touristy map of it. You can see the road, the Lascar Highway that comes in from the north. You actually pass by where all the rich people come into on the airport. I had to drive 2 days to get to it. A lot of people come in, fly into the airport, go down, see it, and then leave. Either stay at the resort. You can see Ayers Rock Resort. That's still the name, even though that they stuck with that old English name, even though the rock has changed to Uluru. But that is a resort that we'll talk about in future lectures. Once you get past that, you can go down officially into the park through the boundary, pay your fee, and go down, visit the rock, and then go over and visit Kata-Tjuta. And so there's a lot of things that you're not seeing, hiking trails and other infrastructure that's part of the national park in this map. All right, so I'm going to end the lecture here. Basically, you now have a little feel for the area. And so stay tuned for future lectures where we get more into the people and the process.